Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl. Continuing our Warhammer World adventure, we're looking at the Empire as part of our faction focus, and we're now looking at part 2 of the special units in the army list, seeing how they played in 8th edition and seeing how they might play in Warhammer The Old World, albeit with some different rules. So, in terms of the special units, we're now on to the Pistoliers. Above average leadership, low strength, toughness, wounds, and initiative. They came with a brace of pistols and light armour. The unit size is 5+, and they can have full command characters. Special rules they get is fast cavalry. Now, ranged cavalry, rarely seen on the tabletop across the board. So things like Illyrian Reavers, Skeleton Horse Archers, that sort of stuff. You just didn't really see them very often. The points cost of the models generally limits the numbers. And the low impact of shooting at Ballistic Skill 3 and generally the low strength meant the damage output doesn't justify the cost. They're also in light armor. They're vulnerable to enemy shooting, and if you want ranged cavalry, I'd still pick the Outriders over the Pistoliers. They're 3 points more per model, but I'd still prefer them over the Pistoliers. So, yeah, when looking at ranged cavalry, these are not bad. In terms of an overall pick, that being a black powder weapon, you kind of get the strength of the weapon, but the range isn't great. They're going to be in range of enemy shooting most of the time. Fast cavalry is nice, but overall, again, just better choices in the special category. And you think about these being 18 points per model. You take 5 of them, what else you could take for that amount of points, how much impact that will have on the tabletop, and these guys would just struggle to make their points cost back in ranged damage, which is really what they're there for. So next up, it is a similar story with the Outriders. However, they do get a repeater handgun, a light armor, and they can also take barding at the cost of losing fast cavalry. But as with the Pistoliers, rarely taken, though I still would prefer to take the Outriders over the Pistoliers. And I would never take the barding because I want to keep the unit as cheap as possible, and I do want to retain that fast cavalry rule. So if you must take a unit of ranged cavalry, this would be my pick, but keep them cheap. Don't take the barding, and make sure they've got that fast cavalry for the mobility. But overall, again, as I said, they just struggle to make their points cost back. 21 points per model. They're only 1 point cheaper than taking an Empire Knight. And even that, I think, would probably be better. The amount of damage they could do on the charge versus the amount of damage these guys are going to do. And like I say, very, very vulnerable to enemy archers and ranged units, even spells as well, bearing in mind they only have light armor and mounted. So now we come on to something that is a real special part of the Empire army. They're known for their gun lines, and in particular their artillery units and black powder units. So here we have the Great Cannon, found in the Imperial Armory section of the army list. It is specific to the Empire. Average ballistic skill, good leadership, equipment-wise. It's a hand weapon, it's a war machine. It does come with 3 crew. Obviously, it's a unit size of 1. No special rules. To be honest, I always took at least 1 Great Cannon. Strength 10, multiple wounds D6, being the best way for an Empire army to deal with enemy monsters and tough mounted characters. I know a lot of people say, we never took Great Cannons, but you have to consider the Great Cannon being 120 points. Yes, you want to put stuff into the Great Swords. Yes, there are other better options for artillery, for example, in the rare category, but how many things can you take in the rare category? It is points limited, so you got that 120 points around. And as I said before, I know I do have a leaning towards gunline armies. So yes, while I do like my great swords, if you get a hit in with this Great Cannon at strength 10 and multiple wounds D6, and you roll reasonably well, even roll average 3 to 4 wounds, that's pretty nice. You're going to start having an impact on some of these monsters, and you are definitely going to cause people to think twice. You've only got to roll good on a couple of turns, and you can be doing 5, you know, if on your wounds, you could be sort of 9, 10 wounds. Well, you're going to remove nearly every monster in the game at that point. So, you know, it makes a good deterrent for big monsters, makes them consider what they're doing and what range they're in. This has pretty good range as well. But like all war machines, you know, you've got to think about, is it vulnerable to flying, you know, flying units? So you've got to think about, do you need to protect it? But there's no doubt this is a great weapon for dealing with enemy monsters. Personally, I took it. I know a lot of people didn't like the Great Cannon. As I said, though, I do lean towards those gunline armies, and I actually did like it. And, you know, you think out of a 5 or 6 turn game, you know, even if you get 3 shots off that you actually, you know, successfully roll to wound and strength 10, you should be wounding most of the time. You know, that multiple wounds D6 is pretty nice. Next up is the mortar. So the mortar there, average ballistic skill, good leadership, equipment, hand weapon is war machine with 3 crewmen again, unit size is 1. And again, I took 1 great cannon and 1 mortar. This uses a stone thrower profile, so, you know, it's got high strength, multiple wounds at the template center, template damage on tough units to help out the generally weaker Empire infantry. Though it should be noted, I generally trend to gunline lists. I've said that before. So you kind of got the great cannon for taking out, you know, those single characters on mounts, the big monsters, that sort of thing. Whereas you've got the mortar here, which is really good at dropping it on enemy units, particularly large units. So you've got large units for infantry, large units of ranged, which generally have very little armor save. You know, this thing would be a very good option to drop on those units and cause multiple casualties. So like I say, with the great cannon, yes, a lot of people didn't like it, but I took 1 great cannon, 1 mortar to give me flexibility, because you never know what army you're going to come up against. And even if you went up against the Tomb Kings with their incredibly tough constructs, you know, War Sphinx is toughness 8, strength 10 is very nice, but when you've got those hordes of skeletons, you definitely want the mortar doing the damage. The final list in the Empire Special Unit category are the Flagellants. So, stats, low everything, but they do have good leadership. They do come with a flail. Unit size is 10 plus. Special rules is Frenzy, Unbreakable, and the end is Nigh. Now, this is an interesting one. So, if in combat, at the start of the turn, they take D6 strength hits, as in the flagellant unit takes D6 strength 3 hits. If they take casualties, they then get a buff. So if you take 1 casualty, you reroll hits. If you take 2 to 3 casualties, you reroll hits and wounds. If you take 4 casualties, you get +1 toughness and you reroll hits and wounds. So, to be honest, rarely seen the tabletop. 1, it's really not my flavour of unit. They do lack durability. They got no armour save at all. And while the mechanic, the special rule, that whole end of night is fun, you know, they can put out the damage, you know, with the frenzy. And the fact they're unbreakable, they can be very swingy with that buff. Yeah, okay, if you've got +1 toughness, you're re-rolling hit and wounds, you've got frenzy, and you've got a flail, that could be quite interesting. But, you know, you've lost 4+ models to do that, which means you've got to take a sizable unit. They're 12 points a model, so they cost more than greatswords. So at the end of the day, I'd rather take greatswords than these guys, and that's really what it comes down to, is that they're not my flavour. Greatswords are better, in my opinion, and so I'd rather take greatswords than this unit. So to be honest, and I rarely saw them, certainly in my local area where I was playing. I certainly wasn't playing globally, and I know different areas have different metas. Certainly in my area, I just didn't see these guys. I saw more people putting greatswords on the table than these guys. And like I say, with spells and ranged, you can get through these guys pretty quickly. I know they're unbreakable, but you know, how many of you actually got left by the time they've got into combat? And that's a big problem. And that brings us to the end of the part 2 of our special units. We're not much further to go. We've got the rare category, and then we're into the legendary characters. So rare category up next. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't know, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, please hit that subscribe button. It is totally free for you to do, and it is a massive deal for me, so thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Owl. Tune back in for those Empire rare units.